Welcome back to the Joe Schmo Show. I am your host, Joe Pucci. Today, obviously, there's been major developments with the situation in Minneapolis involving the ICE-related shooting, and that's pretty much what I'm going to cover today. Um, just a quick update on the Iranian situation. Protests seem to be um, escalating. Today was supposed to be a major strike involving as many places of business as possible and as many regions as could be as possible. And what's interesting is the Iranian regime has cut off the internet in at least one location, Kermanshah, I believe. I'm not sure if it's more widespread than just one city in Iran, if it's the whole country, the internet has been shut off or not. But if that is the case, I'm just hoping and praying that the attempt is to prevent people from gathering rather than some sort of mass execution, mass murder on the part of the regime. Because whenever a government tries to shut down communication, you have that possibility that they're trying to get away with something. Still looking to see what happens in the near future with the Iranian protests, but you know. It, that's something to discuss at a later time. Obviously, there's more um, pressing domestic issues. Yesterday, at some point during the day, I believe it was in the morning or early afternoon, there was a shooting involving a woman who was driving her vehicle, um, or in her vehicle. The vehicle wasn't actually driving at the moment of the ICE interaction, and as she started moving her vehicle, an ICE officer or ICE agent fired off 1 to 3 rounds, hitting a woman, killing her. Um, I would like to go through the video with you. I'm not going to post it along with this podcast because I want to avoid any issues with censorship on YouTube or Spotify. I'd rather this not get an explicit rating or anything like that. But give me a moment to pull up the video that I have set up here. All right. So there's been a number of videos that have been posted already purporting to show this event. Most of what you have already seen, if you've seen these videos, is coming from one angle where it's not clear where the ICE agents are in relation to the vehicle, especially as it starts to move. You can see one ICE agent with his arm in the vehicle trying to unlock the car, trying to get this woman out so she can be arrested because, and this is the interesting thing, there really isn't much information as to what exactly is leading up to this, and I would like more information as to what is leading up to this. Uh, it's been suggested that she was following ICE agents, harassing them, whatever the case might be. So be it. Um, but in this particular instance, in this moment, her vehicle starts to move, and as her vehicle starts to move, you notice from a separate angle, and I'll link to the video. There's another ICE agent that's directly in front and to the side of her vehicle, directly in front of and slightly to the side of her vehicle. And from the video I'm looking at, which I will post, you can see that this vehicle starts to move at a higher rate of speed from zero, from stop, and he moves 3 to 6 feet. I'm looking at probably something like 4 feet, um, without his feet moving. So obviously, he was hit by the vehicle. That is very important because a lot of people are saying he wasn't hit by the car. Oh, blah blah. It was a unjustified shooting. Blah blah. He was clearly hit by the vehicle from this angle. Okay, some images and video that are being shown by uh, people that are trying to profit off of this politically and foment more chaos, protest, whatever, is this ICE agent off to the side with his arms raised, his weapon raised. But these are after the shooting has actually occurred. As a result, you can see that he was hit by the vehicle. He had already gotten off a couple of rounds. I believe the number is 3 rounds, but I'm not going to quote that because, it's in the early stages of an investigation. I only see 1 round being shot in the video. They say it's 3. More information is going to come out, and that'll be corrected. Um, but he was definitely hit by the vehicle. You got another agent that's got his arm in the vehicle as it's moving, which itself is a dangerous situation. There's a lot of people out there saying, "Oh, ICE isn't law enforcement. You have no expectation to obey their orders." Bullshit. That is bullshit. ICE is law enforcement. It's immigration and customs enforcement, but it is law enforcement. Okay. If they tell you to stop, you stop, just like you stop for, a traffic stop for the local police or whatever the case might be. Why they're telling her to get out of the car, again, don't know that yet. Is it relevant to the situation? Probably not so much. They're telling her to get out of the vehicle. She attempts to flee. Um, an ICE agent is struck by the vehicle, whether that was intended or not, unsure. I can't imagine that she missed the fact that someone is directly in front of her vehicle. All right. I'm not going to cast aspersions as to what her motivation was, other than potentially harassing or protesting ICE activities in Minneapolis. But that's the reality of the situation. Out of self-defense, which, let's be honest here, a vehicle moving at you is potentially a deadly weapon. So deadly force is warranted in any type of situation like that. I don't want to come across as a shill for the federal government, a shill for the Trump administration, or Secretary Kristi Noem or anything. She has stated that this was an act of domestic terrorism. Um, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as domestic terrorism. Uh, we don't know what the driver's motivation was, whether she actually intended to run over this ICE agent, and even then, uh, you question whether that's an act of terrorism or an act of attempted homicide. I'm not really sure, um, really, that it stands the muster to call it terrorism. That being said, as the investigation continues into this incident on multiple levels, I assume the local police or state police are also investigating this to whatever extent they can. The FBI is. There's also internal investigations with DHS in regards to, how this ICE agent acted, even though DHS and the president has as of right now stood behind this agent, said he acted in self-defense. I would caution people very much to ignore the commentary on this incident that is clearly intended to foment agitation against ICE, foment agitation against the Trump administration. All right, it is clearly a sad situation that someone died in this incident. Whenever someone is killed, whether it's a result of their actions or not, it's a sad situation. Okay, I'm glad that no one else was harmed, no one else was killed in this incident. As you can see in the video, it races off and hits another parked car. Luckily, it appears no one was in that car. And as far as the woman involved, if you're simply protesting, simply maybe just harassing ICE, but not in the sense of actually causing them harm, that's relatively legitimate. Okay, but when you start driving off, hitting someone, yeah, that's a problem. That is a huge problem. Now, I would like to get into some of the commentary that people like Tim Walz and Governor Tim Walz and Mayor of Minneapolis Jacob Frey have said in the aftermath of this incident. Starting off with Tim Walz, and I'll quote some of his statement. I also have a link. I'm sorry, a video bookmark in my playlists that's assigned to this podcast. that you can go back and check statements. Walz says, quote, "We do not need any further help from the federal government." Okay, fair enough. He clearly faults the federal government for acting, for being in Minneapolis with ICE conducting operations. He has consistently been opposed to ICE involvement. He has consistently tried to, act in support of these illegal immigrant communities, Somali or illegal Latin American migrants or whoever. I mean, that very much is clearly the case. He's been at odds with the federal government over immigration enforcement for a very long time. Well, very long time, for the last year at least. And of course, he's always complained about President Trump before the election and before the current enforcement operations. He is putting the Minnesota National Guard on a standing order in case he needs to call them out in response to potential uprising, potential, uh, violent protests. We've already seen how Minneapolis gets when something like this happens. Look at the George Floyd case. Look at everything that happened as a result of that. There's a strong potential for at least sideline violence. What I mean by sideline violence is potentially people out there peacefully protesting, and then some people use that, take advantage of that, and commit acts of violence that are not necessarily in relation to the actual thing that they're protesting, right? Looting and rioting just as an excuse, using the protest as an excuse to do that, even though they would do that otherwise. And what is this? The third time I got to turn my phone on silent. I hate this. Someone remind me next time I put a video up that I need to turn my phone on silent beforehand. Anyway, so, he's calling these National Guard, potentially calling out the National Guard to ostensibly deal with, expected protest. You've already seen some of that happen. He says it's a patriotic duty to protest and peaceful resistance. Okay, I have a problem with the word resistance. What are you resisting? Okay, how are you resisting? Um, Protesting and demonstrations could be considered resistance to some extent. Um, I think that language is somewhat problematic. He goes on to say it's totally predictable and totally avoidable. Well, yes, it is. And if you didn't use inflammatory language and worked with ICE instead of trying to stop them at every turn and say the crap that you have said before, Governor Walz, this probably would not happen. Okay, Minnesota is a sanctuary state. You know what that means? That means local and state police are basically barred from working with ICE to prevent situations like this from happening, to prevent ICE from having to be, or other federal agencies, in the street trying to, on one hand, do legitimate law enforcement, immigration enforcement activities, as well as protecting their asses. Because we've seen countless examples, over 100 examples at this point, of vehicle attacks against ICE in the last year. So, yeah, it's totally predictable and totally avoidable, and part of that rests on your shoulders, Governor Walz. And going along with the fact that, Minnesota is a sanctuary state, Minneapolis is a sanctuary city, because law enforcement is barred from working with ICE, the ICE and other federal agencies are not giving the local and state politicians and police forces a heads up when actions are being planned and taken. All right. He complains about not being given a heads up on these activities, but that's as a result of his own policy. ICE and other, DHS would be more than willing, as we've seen in other places in the country, to work with local law enforcement so they don't have to be out there like they are doing the operations and then protecting their asses from people that are harassing them and potentially a violent threat, because you have seen in the past that people will act violently towards ICE, whether in the moment or in a premeditated way. He goes on to say, quote, "We've never been at war with the federal government." Okay, that phrase implies, this standoff between the state and the federal government. I believe in that instance, he's talking about the National Guard's role potentially in addressing protests that may or may not get more heated. I would expect them to get more heated. We'll see what happens tonight. Because generally those things start to happen at night when night falls and people think they're, more at liberty to commit acts of violence and whatever the case might be. Uh, Again, there wouldn't be this standoff if the governor, wasn't so, antagonistic towards a legitimate law enforcement function. Like there clearly, ICE has a legal mandate to conduct operations in regards to uh, immigration enforcement. That's why they exist. All right. Unlike what he has said before, he said at a commencement speech that ICE is a modern day Gestapo. Bullcrap. And your language like that is in part fomenting the chaos that ends up with a woman killed or ICE agents killed. So if anyone needs to stop anything, he needs to stop his inflammatory rhetoric, and others need to stop their inflammatory rhetoric. I'll get to the mayor, Jacob Frey, here in a moment. All right. He says, calls out the ICE agents, says he's a rogue federal agent. But then in the same sentence, he says he wants to be very careful. Careful about what? You already called him a rogue ICE agent. You already passed judgment. Thank God well, I'll get to that. You've already passed judgment. You're not being very careful. You're inciting protest. Now, inciting protest is one thing. That may be fine. But is it okay to incite protests that could potentially get violent? I question, that gray area is he calling for violence to actually happen, or is he, legitimately calling on people to use their First Amendment, their free speech rights, and protest peacefully? Now, his words say one thing. Yes, he's saying peacefully protest, peacefully come out and voice your opinion. And on the other hand, he's inciting crowds and inciting this hatred of ICE. He's inciting this hatred of the federal government. He's making it seem like there's a standing conflict between the state and the federal government. Okay, not a good situation for him to put himself in. Not a good situation for him to put his residents in. Not a good situation for him to put the federal government in, because now the National Guard might have to be nationalized to address if this situation gets out of hand, and because Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota really doesn't seem to take an interest in actually promoting law and order and securing the situation. He also says, if you're in Portland or Chicago or Los Angeles, stand with us. Stand with us against this. Stand with us against, ICE operations. Stand with us against, this supposed, illegitimate action on the part of the federal government in enforcing immigration law. Very clearly, Governor Walz is promoting antagonism towards the federal government, antagonism towards ICE. There have been other actions in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, that seem to directly attempt to stymie federal action. And one has to ask whether all of this combined represents a violation of the Insurrection Act. I question whether the actions and the language of people like Tim Walz and Jacob Frey, which I'll get to in a moment, but also Karen Bass and Mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, excuse me, of Los Angeles, and Brandon Johnson in Chicago, and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. The things that they say and the things that they do promote, incite hatred against the federal government, particularly in regards to ICE and particularly in regards to President Trump himself, the actions they take in their official capacities to protect illegal immigrants can be considered, a direct violation, direct confrontation with legitimate federal enforcement operations, which itself would be characterized as insurrection. So I wonder, at some point, does the federal government and the Trump administration need to crack down on these actions? I don't care about so much, politicians saying things unless they're actually inciting chaos. But the actions they take are a violation of the Insurrection Act. What they are doing is intentionally attempting to stymie federal law enforcement. That is insurrection. Okay. Um, Getting to Jacob Frey, who's the mayor of Minneapolis. I think one of the viral clips has been him telling, him saying to ICE, "Get the F out," without, with actually saying the F word, which I'm not going to repeat because there's no point to. So I'm sure you've all seen that, and if you haven't, I mean, it's out there. Um, so he says, quote, "They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense." And my response is, and you're trying to spin it as not an act of self-defense. So what's the point of that statement? Like, you're obviously making a political statement. You're obviously trying to spin it. You're obviously being a hypocrite saying that somehow you're taking an objective view when the other side, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and ICE is taking the subjective point of view. Well, I mean, if you actually look at the videos, and he claims he has, then it's very clear that this vehicle hits this ICE agent, which then in turn makes that vehicle a potential deadly weapon, and deadly force is appropriate in response. He later, in his statements, obviously he calls this claim that I just expressed bullshit, and obviously the video evidence does not, does not support his claim. What's funny is he says, "Oh, I won't preempt the investigation." Yet he just claimed that at one side of this is bullcrap, bullshit. Okay, yeah, you won't preempt it, but you're preempting it. Okay, that's hypocrisy. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. All right, this guy wants to be believed by some, but he says things that are just clearly untrue or clearly hypocritical. All right. Like Tim Walz, he said, he basically acknowledges that someone is going to get hurt, but your language has inflamed the situation, is part of the reason why these protesters are out there, part of the reason why ICE has been harassed around the country, uh, including in Minnesota, including in Minneapolis. Now, he makes claims that ICE dragged a pregnant woman through the street. I'm not sure where that's coming from, and that ICE is indiscriminately targeting Latino and Somali people. Oh, you care more about the illegal immigrants in your city and making something more political than it should be. For what purpose? To for your own political gain? I'm not sure when his next election is or if he's even going to run, but I mean, obviously, the more you foment this anger towards the federal government and towards legitimate immigration enforcement operations, the more he may profit off of it politically, and just very clearly that's what he's doing. And I take huge issue with any politician trying to stand up for illegal immigrant communities. Like, they shouldn't be here. Okay, they just should not be here. Your responsibility are towards your legal residents, not your illegal residents. Okay, in all reality, you should be working with ICE and the federal government and any federal agency in addressing what the president has been trying to do, and that is to, at the very least, round up violent criminals, and a lot of others have been caught up in this, on the way towards that goal. Uh, Not to get off topic, but we saw a case in California where the ICE was targeting a farm, and it turns out this pot farm was employing child labor, illegal immigrant children, and they're not profiting off of that. Break. I'm going to address the whole issue with illegal immigration and the economic side of things in a different video. But there's a huge problem with illegal immigrants being used for uh, cheap labor, basically. Back to Jacob Frey. He says none of this can justify use of deadly force under the law. You don't need a law degree to know that. Well, you don't need a law degree to know that a vehicle can be used as a deadly weapon, and in this case, it appears it was. So he's claiming one thing, and he's wrong. He's just wrong, and he's using it for political advantage. One questions whether he's using it to foment chaos, foment violent protest. Because clearly he doesn't like ICE being in the city. So what's one way to get ICE out? Frankly, this won't work. But more attacks on ICE will get a response from ICE, and maybe he thinks that will get them out of the city. Well, I doubt that's going to happen. He says we're going to stand up for our immigrant neighbors because they are being targeted and attacked. Obviously, you don't care about the actual legal residents of your citizens. Mind you, a lot of these legal residents of the city are themselves immigrants, but immigrants that came here legally. Okay? All you care about are your illegal immigrants, it seems. Where's your statement in support of the legal residents of Minneapolis that are suffering under your terrible leadership? Or the terrible leadership of Governor Walz? Give me a break. Like, this is not unique to Jacob Frey. You see similar statements with Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass sticking up for illegal immigrant communities. Okay, well, where are you sticking up for the victims of crimes committed by illegal immigrants? And people say, oh, crime is committed by native born or legal people just as much, or if not more so, and blah blah blah. Well, the point is, an illegal immigrant should not be here in the first place. Therefore, any crime they commit is crime that should never have happened in the first place. And it is crime that has been allowed to happen by state, local, and in the case of the Biden and Obama administrations, federal officials to allow these people to stay there with impunity. And a lot of them are drug lords, are drug traffickers, are part of drug gangs, are part of other criminal enterprises. That's just a fact. Okay, that is just a fact. And when you blindly, you blind yourself to that fact and just without caveat support these illegal immigrant communities, right? You're creating more of a problem. Seriously, these people are insane. This should not even be a political issue. Hell, in the 1990s with Bill Clinton, it was not even a political issue. Right? Clinton wanted to enforce immigration law more to a degree than his successor Democrats, Obama and Biden, ever did. Right? Pardon me. He uses the phrase occupying force to characterize potential federal efforts to quell unrest. Again, with the terminology that pits the federal government against the state and local government, creating a situation where people see, creating a perception that people need to take one side or the other, and rise up against the federal government and ICE and all this. It's just terrible. It's terrible messaging. It's, whether it is meant to or not, promotes actions that go well beyond simple protesting, simple peaceful protesting. They know what can happen and what likely will happen as a result of this, and they continue to incite it. They continue to incite it. We've said very clearly that we will not coordinate with any federal agency around immigration enforcement. Well, that's part of the problem, Mayor Frey. That is part of and Tim Walz, Governor Walz, that is part of the problem. And he goes on to talk about compassion and love. Yeah, okay. what you're saying about ICE, what you're saying about Trump, what you're saying about people that support immigration enforcement is not very compassionate or loving. Now, is it? Now, all you care about is the compassion and love towards one particular segment. I'm not even going to say segment of the population because these people are not supposed to be part of the population, but one segment of the people that are living in the United States, living in your city, living in your state. That's all you care about, it seems. And he says winning an election does not mean you get to violate the Constitution. I think you, Governor Walz, Mayor Karen Bass, Governor Gavin Newsom are all more at risk of supposed violations of the Constitution, in particular the supremacy of federal law over state law, than the president is in sending ICE to enforce existing immigration law. So, and he acknowledges a drop in crime. I wonder why your crime is dropping. Maybe it's because, in part, as a result of ICE enforcement, and possibly a result in the drop in illegal immigrants in this country. A fear on the part of bad actors within illegal immigrant circles, and maybe quieting them a little bit. I'm not really sure. But yeah, crime is dropping. You can't deny that ICE enforcement is partly part of that. And then, of course, he says you can be part of this movement to have this kind of thing stop from happening. All right. Again, is he inciting legitimate protest? Is he inciting legitimate protest with the full knowledge that there are clearly going to be bad actors out there trying to cause more violence? If I were in the situation, if I were a leader in this situation, I probably wouldn't be calling on people to get out there in the street and protest. I would probably try and, uh, assuage concerns, tell them that, yes, I'm on your side, and we will take every effort to investigate this fully and if necessary, bring those to justice that should be brought to justice. Of course, he knows he can't really do that, especially as the mayor. We'll see if Governor Walz tries to attempt to have some action against this ICE agent. That's one thing that I wonder if there will be charges brought at the state level against this ICE agent. And if there is, and he's being protected by the federal government, that's going to create a huge standoff, at least legally. I don't think charges should be brought, but again, investigation ongoing. I would wait until a full investigation is done before you start complaining about all sorts of nonsense, because that's really what it is. Now, this video has gone a little bit long. I did want to get into a few other things. One thing I will note is that some of these, there have been, a vigil and a rally immediately following the events during the night. One thing I noticed, and this is going to be on my the Fox video that is going to be in the playlist assigned to this podcast. You see that there's a Mexican flag and some sort of red flag being waved as part of these protests, this vigil or rally or whatever they want to call it. And it just goes to show that a lot of people on the side of against ICE are illegal immigrants or supporters of illegal immigrants, and they really don't care about the actual law as it exists. They just care about, they care about, taking action against President Trump. They care about, just complaining whenever they can about anything that Trump ever does, regardless of how legitimate it is. And obviously, as I've said, ICE actions are legitimate enforcement of existing federal law, and the states really can't do a diddly squat about it. Right? It would be better for them to work with the federal government rather than trying to stop the federal government, stop ICE from acting. I'm worried about the situation, whether it's going to get worse. I'm worried about whether there's going to be another George Floyd-esque uh, protest, more than protest, occur. We'll see as we get into tonight and over the next few days to see how widespread this is going to be, because as you saw in the George Floyd incident, that it started in Minneapolis, and then it grew out of Minneapolis into a much larger national debacle. I'm hoping this doesn't happen. Um, I'm not sure whether Governor Walz will, in fact, call out the National Guard to preserve security in Minneapolis or across the state. And I'm not sure what President Trump's actions will be in regards to the same, in regards to potentially nationalizing the National Guard or federalizing the National Guard, if in fact Tim Walz does not take actions that would be necessary should the need arise. Hopefully things calm down. Hopefully people actually watch the video that shows he's actually being hit and realize that this was not a bad shoot, and it's a bad situation. It's a tragic situation. The word tragic is, I think, often misused, overused. This woman got herself into a situation. She should have complied. She didn't, and in the process of, whether intentional or not, partially running over an ICE agent, she gets herself shot. It's a terrible situation, but she caused it herself, unfortunately. All right. I'll come back with more information about this as it warrants. Obviously, we're still following the Iran situation. I know this video has gone a little bit longer than previous ones. I hope this helps give you at least one side of the perspective. Obviously, again, I have my own perspective, and there is bias involved in that, and I try to make sure that address that bias, whether or that perspective, and make it as objective as possible. Um, Not to make this even longer, but there are potentially legitimate, concerns as it regards to illegal immigrants, whether they should stay here, whether they shouldn't stay here, how long they've been in the community, how upright they have been in the community. And I think my next podcast, I'm going to focus, at least in part, on one of my potential proposals. One thing that I think would help alleviate the strain on for both sides. Okay, something that we can all maybe agree on, right? And give reasons why I believe that. So I appreciate you listening to me, and if you've gotten this far, thank you very much, and have a good day. And pray for Minneapolis, and pray for ICE, and pray for the family of this woman that was killed as well.